All right. So I think most of you had me before. I'm Dr. Littman. You can call me Dr. Littman, Mike, Yo Fatty, any of those work. I am not very formal, if you haven't discovered that yet. Um, in any case, this is our special topics course. The topic changes pretty much every year. We might recycle topics every 4 years. So you can repeat this class up to 3 times. Um, so actually, I think you can repeat it up to twice for real credit, and then after that, it's elective credit. But in any case, we usually try to have some fun topics, iPhone programming, stuff like that. So the topic that we're doing this particular semester deals with something that's kind of interesting that's been on the news a lot lately, and also is very computer science related, and that's cryptocurrencies. So you've probably seen it in the news as Bitcoins or any of the altcoin stuff. We'll talk about all of that, but that's what the topic of this class is going to be. So we're going to learn about what they are, how they work, what happens behind the scenes. Ultimately, we're going to create our own coin. I'll take suggestions for naming the coin, but right now I've coined it Falcoin. Falcoins, Falcons, haha, get it? Haha. So. I figured I wanted to have something stupid, so what I did is ask Professor Wall what he would name it. That's the first. That's the first thing that came out. So I figured that should go over well. And then taking it kind of a step further, where we'll have prizes here in the department where you can actually buy hard drives and stuff like that with Falcoins. You'll get rewarded in your other classes with Falcoins for good grades and stuff like that, and actually create kind of a micro economy of altcoins on campus. And of course, then take over the world. So, and we're going to deal with all aspects of it, and we'll talk about what all the different aspects are. We'll have kind of an overview today. Many classes, I'm going to leverage some video resources that are online. So many classes will start off with about a 10-minute video, and then we'll talk about the concepts from that video. So we're going to be dealing with it at a couple different levels in here. We're going to be dealing with it kind of at the high level introductory. Then we're going to be dealing with kind of the nuts and bolts of it from a computer science perspective. The security algorithms that are used, the competing technologies, specifically in the security algorithms. We will likely write some software dealing with that, dealing with some APIs that connect with some of the different cryptocurrency sites. So we should get a pretty good hodgepodge of stuff. Generally speaking, it works just like all my other classes. Homework, 45% of your grade. Quizzes, 15% of the grade. They will, let's call it 99% of the time, be pop quizzes. I just randomly give them. Usually it's attendance-based. So if, I say attendance-based, that is, if a bunch of people are missing, I tend to give quizzes. But I reserve the right to just give a quiz for whatever reason. But that'll be 15% of your grade. There's a midterm and a final, each worth 20% of your grade. I'm a big advocate that one day, one bad performance shouldn't necessarily screw your grade up. So if you struggle on the midterm, that kind of gives you an idea of where you're currently at competency-wise, and then we can work something out for counting the final double or something like that. So I'm here to give you every opportunity to be successful, but that doesn't mean that if you don't do crap, you're going to pass. So you got to do your part, and I'll try to make it as low stress as possible. Typical grading scale, 90, 80, 70, 60, blah, blah, blah. Boom. Syllabus, it's up on Angel already. So questions about that stuff, jazz? Okay, so let's start talking about some stuff. This one. There might be some weird slides in here because I actually put together some things from a couple different slide sets I found last night, and then I couldn't find that version.
Wait, so are you saying you actually prepared?
Well, to a certain extent. But actually, the reality is no, because I spent about maybe a half hour while I was watching TV with my wife last night, and like pulling some stuff in from different slide sets. and I have it saved somewhere. I must have put it in a different folder than I expected. So all I can find is the original, which doesn't have all the other ones removed. So, there might be some crap. I'll just delete it real quick and you pretend like you didn't see it. So let's start with this. I know some of you had me last semester. You got kind of the one-day quick thing about cryptocurrencies. But what do we know about cryptocurrencies? Let's go this route. How many of you have never heard or have very limited knowledge of what a cryptocurrency is? So everybody else in here knows what cryptocurrencies are? So we should have our first quiz. All right, so if you had to give me a definition of a cryptocurrency, what would you say? What is a cryptocurrency? Don't all speak at once. Go ahead.
It's a currency that's based off of coding algorithms to create a online-based currency that has no sort of regulation at all.
Okay, that last part is kind of a good piece. It's an unregulated currency, as opposed to fiat currencies like U.S. dollars. So U.S. dollars, we use U.S. dollars for money, right? You can buy a sandwich with U.S. dollars or a Coke or something like that. But they have a perceived value. Somebody says this sandwich is worth $2.50. So you pull out $2.50 now, you give them that, they give you the sandwich. The problem, or a problem, I don't want to say the problem. So one thing that we're going to talk some in here is, there's plenty of political. We'll bring up some news stories that are going on right now and things like that. We'll kind of debate the two sides. There's plenty of political pressure dealing with cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, which is let's call it the flagship cryptocurrency. But there's about 5,000 alt currencies that are spin-offs, let's say. But there's often two sides to the coin, and it's kind of unclear which is the right answer, if you will. So I'm going to kind of present the case for both sides. So with a fiat currency like a US dollar, the good thing is that it's federally backed, correct? If you have a bank account and somebody robs the bank, well, your account is federally insured up to $100,000. Okay, so if you had $5,000 in the bank and the bank gets robbed, you didn't lose anything. Government will just print more money and then put it back in the bank. Okay, now that's the downside. So so the cat's out of the bag. One thing that we might say is a problem with fiat currencies, not just the US dollar, but any government-controlled currency or a currency controlled by any entity, is that entity typically can just choose to make more. So if you have $100 in your pocket and the government goes and prints $30 billion, your $100 might now be worth $96. United States, it doesn't really change that much. Interesting fact, over the last century, the best predictor of the current value of the US dollar within the country, because you can go out into Bloomberg and other exchanges and things like that and get an idea of how much the US dollar is worth compared to the euro or things like that, and then you're getting kind of more of a stock trader perspective of value. But within the United States, the US dollar is worth more to us here than it would be outside the country, correct? Okay, so what do you think has been over the last century the best indicator of the value of the US dollar in the United States? Go ahead.
Women's skirts.
Women's skirts. No, that has not been this indicator. No other guesses? That surely can't be the best guess. The best indicator over the last century has been the Big Mac. The price of the Big Mac has been a very good indicator of the current value in terms of buying power of the US dollar in the United States. Very interesting how closely the US dollar, how much a Big Mac costs is a measurement of how much you can buy with the dollars in your pocket. So, just kind of an interesting fact.
Why do you use Big Mac?
Huh?
Why?
Well, nobody actually uses the Big Mac. It's more hindsight. You go back and you look at how much how much like a gallon of gas cost, or how much a gallon of milk cost, or meat, beef prices, things like that. If you go back 30 years and you look at those things, and then you also look at the price of a Big Mac during that period of time, the Big Mac is what actually that became the central piece of information that everything else seemed to be based off of. Not directly, but it ended up landing like that. So it's not like some of the people in the gasoline or the petroleum market decided, well, the Big Mac's currently $4.25, so that makes a price of gas per gallon. It just happened to. It's like one of these things that's connected you wouldn't have guessed would be connected. So kind of an interesting connection piece. But in any case, cryptocurrencies are what are called decentralized currencies. Nobody's in control of them. That's something that you mentioned, that they're based on a computer algorithm. So we take Bitcoin as an example. We're going to be dealing with something here called a theory coin during today's lecture, which is just kind of a generic altcoin. But if you take like the Bitcoin and you say, somebody decides, oh, we need to have more Bitcoins. Nobody can make that call. 25 new Bitcoins are born every 10 minutes, period. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about why that is and stuff like that, but that's just a fact. In like 3.5 years, that'll go down to 12.5 Bitcoins per 10 minutes. Nobody makes a decision. It's just part of the math algorithm that defines the Bitcoin. US dollars, who gets to decide if we make more US dollars? Somebody, not us, right? Okay, whether it's supposed to be the National Reserve or Congress, whoever. Somebody's saying pull the trigger and get the printers warmed up, right? And make some more money. So a lot of people might say, okay, that's a weakness of fiat currencies. So a fiat currency, F-I-A-T, is like a US dollar. It would be an example of a fiat currency. People might say that's a weakness of it because we're trusting our government to take good care of us and make sure, preserve the value of our money. But at the same time, it's kind of nice that if we keep our money in a bank and the bank gets robbed, that our money gets replaced, even if they're printing more to replace it. But so I'm of the opinion you have to trust somebody somewhere. I think a fully decentralized system doesn't work. We'll kind of talk about that, but that's really my opinion. Now, well, let's just kind of go through this. So, advent of Bitcoin, where did it come from? Well, prior to 2009, it was really 2007, there was a research paper written on cryptocurrencies in general. Basically, it was a math/computer science paper dealing with an encryption algorithm called SHA-256, and we'll talk about that in detail. I've just giving you the overview today. Now, at that point, it's just kind of an interesting idea, right? In 2009, Bitcoin was announced. So this cryptocurrency. Nobody knew anything about them, wasn't worth anything, blah, blah, blah. It was released by someone or some group named Satoshi Nakamoto. It was released anonymously. We don't know if this is a person, if it's the name of a group. Nobody's come forth and said, hey, we made Bitcoin. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter now because it's already out in the wild and they can't do anything about it. It's not like they can say, well, Bitcoins, there's too many of them, so we're going to cut it in half. It wouldn't work. So between 2009 and 2011, very slow start. Why? Well, because as you're going to see, even today, cryptocurrencies are not the most convenient things to use. There's a lot of moving parts. They're pretty complex to get into. They're cool from a geeky perspective, all right? But I don't think grandpa's using Bitcoins anytime soon. Now, right now, we're starting to see the infrastructure being built. An example I use with folks is, we think about the US dollar differently today than we would have when the dollar was first introduced. When the US dollar was first introduced, cowboys kept it under their hat. That's where they kept their money. And then when people started shooting cowboys to get at their money, then banks were born. So cowboys would give I guess assumed as everybody was a cowboy back then, right? Whatever. They would give their money to these banks for, whatever Yeah, I'm not sure how the early banks necessarily worked, but the idea was the banks protected your money. Well, every single country western show you ever watch, you see the banks getting robbed, right? Because that happened all the time. It was like Bank Robbery Wednesday. See, banks don't get robbed very often now, do they? Why not? Why did we stop robbing banks?
Money is not actually there.
Yeah, there's no money in banks. When was the last? When you put money into your bank, most of the time you're walking in with a paper check, or maybe $100 in cash or something like that. But major deposits, paychecks, things like that, it's all paper. What's money today? Money today is just numbers in an account. A lot of times we pay for stuff by swiping a credit card. So that adds numbers here, and then when you have to pay your bill, it subtracts numbers over here. There actually isn't money. So if somebody had $5 million in a bank account, and they went down the street here to Wells Fargo Bank and wanted to take all $5 million out in cash, I don't think they'd be able to. I doubt very much that bank has more than a couple $100,000 in cash on hand. So we don't rob banks because that's not where the money is. The money's in some system somewhere. So now bank robberies happen from computer hackers breaking into bank vaults and stuff like that. So in any case, 2009, 2011, very, very, very slow start for Bitcoin, mostly because it was just this edgy sideshow freak thing. Didn't really make the news, blah, blah, blah. 2011, 2013 was very much in the news. We had something called Silk Road. Anybody know what Silk Road was? Very entertaining stuff. Maybe one of the bigger problems with Bitcoin. Go ahead.
Wasn't it basically the equivalent of a criminal underground, just the internet that no one knew about?
Yeah. So, and this becomes an issue with Bitcoins. And later on in here, we actually talk about Bitcoin is kind of, or we can just say cryptocurrencies, are kind of money for illegal activity. We've all heard in movies and stuff about money laundering, right? What is money laundering? What does it mean to launder money? Go ahead.
Putting illegal money into something that's not illegal, and then pretty much
filter money through other places so that it comes out clean on the other side, right? Somebody paid for a hit. Somebody was hired to kill somebody, and the money that was used to pay for it actually came out of a laundromat in Queens or something like that. So that would be money laundering. Well, the problem with that is every US dollar can be tracked by serial number. They actually can't track it very well, but a transaction with US dollars is not anonymous. Somebody's writing a check or somebody's handing off cash and somebody has to go put it in a bank someplace. It's trackable, right? Well, cryptocurrencies are anonymous in nature. If I were to send you some Bitcoins, you would receive the Bitcoins not from Mike Littman, but from some random address. And I'd be sending it to this random address that you just have to happen to have access to. And by the way, there isn't even a physical representation. And we'll talk about that as well. But really, there isn't a Bitcoin. Bitcoins are only tracked by this one thing called the blockchain. It's this giant document that just says where all the Bitcoins are. Okay, and we'll talk about possible breaches to security with the blockchain as well. But in any case, Silk Road was a criminal underground that people were buying and selling illegal things, let's say, with Bitcoins in such a way that they couldn't get caught. Why? You can't find them. We don't know who sent the money. We don't know who received the money. We can look into the blockchain. The blockchain is completely public, and we'll look at it at some point. We can look at it and see, oh, well, this one address received a zillion Bitcoins over this 2-week period. Well, something serious is probably going on there. Okay, well, who owns that address? We have no idea. Who sent all the Bitcoins to that address? We have no idea. So that inherently makes it very good for crime. That's why we should adopt this as our national currency. Clearly, right? So, Silk Road, what's actually interesting here is between 2011 and 2013, Bitcoin kind of grew in popularity because it was a good currency for criminals. So why did the price skyrocket into 2013 after the criminals fully adopted it? So that's the end of 2013 when the price skyrocketed for Bitcoin. And let's talk about that. If we would have gone back to 2010, something like that, 2009, early days of Bitcoin, one coin, if you were to buy it with US dollars, was like a penny. You could just buy just tons of coins for nothing, right? End of 2013, anybody know what a single Bitcoin was worth in US dollars? Yeah, like $1,400, $1,500, $1,600. Might have hit $1,700. So let's say you were one of those early adopters that had 20,000 Bitcoins that you got for a penny each. Or you didn't even buy them. Maybe you mined them. We'll talk about mining as well. Maybe you mined those Bitcoins. So now you have all these Bitcoins, and you mined probably a lot of them because you were one of like 7 people mining Bitcoins. That's not the case today. Well, then all of a sudden Bitcoins are worth $1,700 a piece, and you got a million of them. So you had a lot of these like geeks that just became millionaires overnight. One of the stories, there was a guy in Australia, and he had done a research project in like 2009 on Bitcoin. You know, early cryptocurrencies, kind of this new weird thing. And I think he bought like 20,000 Bitcoins as part of this, for nothing. Just decided to skip pizza that night and bought Bitcoins instead. And wrote his research paper, didn't think anything of it. Years later, he saw Bitcoin in the news when the price was skyrocketing. Went back and found his wallet. We'll talk about the Bitcoin wallet and how that works. And bought himself a mansion. Cashed out, bought himself this, and this is in Australia, bought himself this giant mansion and paid off all of his student loans or something like that. And he guy's worth that, he's worth millions from a research paper. Funny. Now, at the end of 2013, we had here, I'll add a little thing here. Here, I'll put it right before that, since I don't know how to. How many of you heard of Mt. Gox? This really should go below the end of 2013, but I forgot how to make that thing go back. So Mt. Gox was the biggest Bitcoin exchange. Now, what's an exchange? For all intents and purposes right now, I want us to think about things like Bitcoin like it's Apple stock. So if you have $1,000 US and you want to own stock in Apple, what do? You go to the stock market, right? Maybe you use your account at E-Trade or something like that, and you say, I want to buy shares of Apple at the current market value in exchange for US dollars. That happens at an exchange. I'm exchanging US dollars for Apple stock. Exchanges exist that exchange, in this case, US dollars for Bitcoin. And the biggest of those exchanges was something called Mt. Gox. That sounds all cloak and daggery, right? Doesn't it sound real interesting? Well, Mt. Gox had a gigantic failure. Think of it like a bank robbery. The end of 2013. You saw the price of Bitcoin go from about $1,700, as he pointed out, down to under $200 per Bitcoin over about a 1-week period. Now, wouldn't you agree Mt. Gox sounds kind of interesting? Like it's like really sounds like James Bondy, cloak and daggery. Anybody know the story behind Mt. Gox? It's a very interesting story, actually. You don't even know it? No. Oh. I've heard of it. So Mt. Gox was a website you would go to for the exchange, and it was actually a repurposed website from another time period, from years before. So this guy who ran Mt. Gox, he had originally written this website for something else. And then, as Bitcoins became popular, he repurposed this old website for buying and selling Bitcoin. Now, the site he had repurposed was a site for buying and selling something else. Mt. Gox stands for Magic the Gathering Online. How many of you have ever played or have heard of Magic the Gathering, the trading card game? Where you tap your mana and you have this monster attack that monster, all with cards. Mt. Gox, that original site, was for but was trading magic cards. And then it was repurposed to become the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world. Very interesting, kind of a fun type backstory. Bitcoin price skyrockets, crashes kind of overnight, goes down below $200 a pop. Came back, got up to almost $700 a couple of months ago. Right now it's sitting somewhere in the low 500s, 520 or something like that. About a couple of weeks ago it dropped from about 630 down to 500. Now it's kind of edging its way back up. But that's kind of where we're sitting right now. Let's say $500 to $600 per Bitcoin. So it has a very interesting past, I guess. Now, the first thing I'd say is, because you're going to learn about a bunch of tools in here where you would have the ability to go out and get some Bitcoins if you'd like. I'm going to throw a disclaimer out there. Extremely volatile. If you're going to get into Bitcoin, hey, for all I know, you're going to buy a Bitcoin and it's going to be worth zillions. Or you're going to buy a Bitcoin and it's going to be worth nothing. All right, so enter at your own risk. I'm not necessarily promoting these but I'm talking about kind of the technology behind it. I happen to own a lot of them. I also run some machines for mining them and things like that. We'll talk about all this stuff. But, it's not necessarily something that is going to make you money. At the very least, we should think of it as being interesting. Okay, that's my disclaimer. Okay, so in this slide set, we're going to talk about something called a theory coin. So we're going to kind of move away from Bitcoin in general, because when we really start talking about the varying technologies, we're going to be talking about how Bitcoin works compared to some of these other coins. Because there's other coins that have taken kind of the Bitcoin way of doing things and just shaken it up a little bit, changed some variables around to make it work a little different. Like instead of new coins being born every 10 minutes, they're born every 1 minute, things like that. But then you have some other alt currencies, for instance, another one's called Litecoin, probably one of your top 3 most popular ones, let's say. That one is actually based on a whole different algorithm called script. So we'll talk about that and how script and SHA-256 are different from each other. So there's a bunch of really interesting math crap behind the scenes there. Okay, so for all intents and purposes right now, we're going to be talking about something called theory coin. Okay, so how is money created? There's multiple sides to Bitcoin. So in this slide set, I think they use the term money for coins, currency. So we're going to call Bitcoin money, which I guess you can pay your DirecTV bill or your Dish Network bill with Bitcoin. So that's money, right? Do the Amish use Bitcoin yet?
No, unfortunately.
Man.
They're looking at
They're looking at Bitcoin, but they can't they don't have the metallic tools to mint them. All right, so how is money created? There are multiple sides to this. I'm actually going to throw a slide here in the middle so I can kind of draw a little picture. Okay. I'm going to put M's. Well, here, we're going to little minor fit in there. There we go. Okay. We have a network of people who have computers. And we're going to call these guys the miners for our theory coin. Now, it's fine. So here in the middle, I'm going to say this is our theory coin. And think about this as just a big math algorithm. We'll talk about that later. But this is the rules that govern the creation of theory coins. Okay? Now, these miners, what they've decided is, hey, we want to support the theory coin community by mining coins. And what does it mean to mine coins? It means we're going to validate the transactions that happened in the last whatever period of time, the last block time. We'll start giving names to these things, so don't worry too much about it now. I'm just kind of giving you an overview. But we're going to validate the transactions that have occurred in the last period of time. And in exchange for this work, we want to be rewarded. How are we rewarded? Well, every block time, so maybe for theory coin, let's say it's 1 minute. The slide set might choose a different time for that. Let's just assume it's 1 minute right now. Every 1 minute, new theory coins will be created out of nothing. And those coins will be distributed to the miners based on which miner won. Think of it like a lottery. Okay? And we're going to talk about this in the next slide, but the coins, these guys validate transactions. And who's making the transactions? People. So these people are buying and selling crap with theory coins. All right? And in order for this guy to get theory coins from this guy, it first needs to go and be validated by these miners. Only at that point in time does that transaction make it onto something called the blockchain. Okay? This is the guy that governs the entire currency. So these are kind of our players. So these guys here, they're going to validate transactions between these guys. When they validate those transactions, the transactions, once validated, end up on the blockchain, and these guys are rewarded with brand new theory coins, which they can then go and become one of the people and spend them. Okay? So that's the 30-second version of kind of how cryptocurrencies work at a very, 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 very high level. Tons of detail in here we just completely skipped. Okay? Now, specifically, coins like Bitcoin, coins that are based on SHA-256, SHA-256, which is a encryption algorithm. We'll just say it like that. It's actually a hashing algorithm. We'll talk about that. They use something called proof of work. Okay? So think of it like a puzzle. So there's a puzzle to solve. So we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep trying to solve a puzzle until we finally get that puzzle right. Who's trying to solve these puzzles? These dudes, these miners. They're the guys who are trying to solve the puzzle. For lack of a better example here, when these two people have a transaction with theory coins in this case, those transactions are added to something called a block. We'll make our block be a circle. We've already used blocks, people. All right. So they get added to the block. And since I verbally said that theory coins are generated every 1 minute in our example here, every 1 minute, a block is released into the wild for these miners to solve. And think of this block, for lack of a better example right now, since we don't have the background for it, think of it as being armored. Okay, it's surrounded by puzzles. Puzzles that need to be broken, solved, in order for these transactions to actually become validated. Make sense? So these guys are fighting the block, if you will. It's like a video game. It's a war. Okay? So these guys are trying to solve this puzzle. And as soon as they solve it, at that point, they can validate things and get to the blockchain. So if this is kind of the steps that one of the miners will take. So each of those miners will be doing this little solve puzzle algorithm, which is just pseudocode here. It's not doing the real thing. We'll talk about the real thing. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to repeat this step, these steps, as long as they did not correctly solve the puzzle. So almost think of this like a Rubik's Cube, where you're going to close your eyes, just then look at it. Did I solve it? And then you're going to close your eyes again. Did I solve it? So something along those lines. It's a bunch of guessing. These things are all based on something called hashing algorithms. If you had a security class before, a hashing algorithm is a one-way cipher. So it's taking an arbitrary size input, arbitrary data, and turning it into a fixed size output. with the hope that there are not collisions. There's no, it's at least minimized the number of hash values that will be the same for two different inputs. A popular hash is something called MD5, and we'll also talk about that when we get into the real nuts and bolts of this. But in any case, a hash cannot be decrypted. It's a one-way cipher. So once you have the crazy little 64 character string or something like that, you can't get back to the original data. So what we're trying to do is we're guessing at the hash. It's kind of like I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Pick the number. But instead of a number between 1 and 10, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and whatever's a little bit less than infinity. Pick that number. When you get it right, I'll let you know. Okay? And that difficulty goes up and down. Right now, it typically goes up as the mining power also goes up. But unimportant to us right now. Each of those miners is going to try to solve the puzzle. Okay? And this is called proof of work. That type of, I say attack because that's really what the miners are doing. They are attacking each block. That's the war thing. So, to create money, these guys are all solving, so these are our people sending coins to each other. Like I had in my diagram, which I think is less confusing, but whatever. So these are people sending coins to each other. These are the actual miners who are hashing it. They're trying to attack the block, and then ultimately they add it to something called the blockchain once it's validated. Once it's validated, then they get paid out. Now, we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail later on, but there is something called the 51% attack. It's a weakness of Bitcoin. The idea of that, here I'll give you the 30-second version. I'm definitely going to re-talk about almost all this stuff throughout the whole semester, because we're dealing with a lot of stuff at a very high level right now. If any one of these miners has more than 51% of the mining power on the entire network, they potentially, under certain circumstances, may have the ability to rewrite the blockchain themselves, which would be bad. Because now what you have is, even though the currency in the center, this guy, is decentralized, meaning there's no human being in charge of that. Theory coins are born every 1 minute, as I've advertised. But if one of these guys gets too powerful, he will solve the problem very, very often, let's say. And since he's the one who can solve the problem, he's also the one who'll be writing to the blockchain. And if he's writing to the blockchain, he then has, and he's writing to the blockchain often, he can actually change what the blockchain says. And since the entire currency is based on what the blockchain says, making changes to that changes everything. The blockchain is a collection of every single, in this case, theory coin transaction that has ever occurred since the birth of the theory coin. So, for example, for Bitcoins, the blockchain is something like 14 gigabytes in size. Some huge, 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 huge document. With every Bitcoin that's ever been born and all the places it's gone, traced through this thing. So imagine if somebody went in there and they modified that to say, oh, a whole bunch of these coins went to me. Now they're rich with Bitcoins. You can immediately cash out and they'll have US dollars before anybody finds out. And there's nothing you can do about it then, right? Because you don't know who they are. It's anonymous. So if I was the guy who did that and I transfer 20 million Bitcoins to myself, just make sure the blockchain says they end up in my wallet, and then I go onto one of the exchanges and I sell off my 20 million Bitcoins for fair market value today. Now I have cash. They never know it was me. Now, with a lot of work, they might be able to see that some dude on one of the public exchanges made a pretty large withdrawal. So maybe you want to do it across many accounts, but, just saying, if you're going to try to attack the network, there's probably some smarter ways of doing it. But the 51% problem is an issue, and we'll talk about that. So, how do we create money? the textual version of this. Solve a puzzle, get a coin, or get some number of coins. For Bitcoin, like I said, every 10 minutes it's 25 coins. So however many coins the algorithm decides it's going to reward, you get that after you solve a puzzle. To find a puzzle, you have to find, to solve a puzzle named I, you're going to find x sub I such that, this is H for hash, such that when you apply this hashing algorithm to x sub I minus 1 along with x sub I, you're searching for this value. So whatever the last value was, along with our guess at this value, when we apply that hashing function to that, it's equal to this guy. That means we guessed right. Okay, that's a correct guess. And if we guessed right, that means we solved the puzzle. The longest chain defines the next puzzle. So we have previous puzzle, we have current puzzle. Well, yeah, let's just say that's true. That's good enough for this example. So to win a coin, it's not just solving a single puzzle. It's solving the most puzzles in a block period. 10 minutes for Bitcoin. Okay? The name in block X sub I gets coin I. The coin or coins associated with that puzzle number. That block. All right? That's how coins are born. Coins are born and delivered to these guys, the miners. So these guys do proof of work on the block. Whoever wins out of these guys gets rewarded by the algorithm with some theory coins. And then these guys can then put on a different hat and decide, oh, I'm going to go spend some of those theory coins I just earned. And, buy stuff. And then they become consumers on this side. Now, somebody can be a consumer and a miner. They can do two separate things, and that'll make sense later. But, coins enter the market through the miners. The miners then start spending them, and that's how it gets into the economy. Okay? So, that is how coins are born. Now, how do we transfer coins? So, in real life, if I'm giving money to you, I might write you a check. I put my name on it, how much money I'm giving you, I sign it, then you take it to your bank and say, this dude gave me money. Here's proof. You hand it to the bank teller scans it, blah, 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 and after 2 to 3 days or whatever it is, money then leaves my account and enters your account. And I have a bank account number, right? My bank account number is more complex than just a single number. It's a number for my account number at a specific bank, and that specific bank has a routing number. So it's a unique account number at a specific routing number. That makes my entire bank account number, right? We're talking about real money now. We're not talking about crazy Bitcoin stuff. So that is the unique address where your money lives. And this other one's the unique address where my money lives. So if I write you a check after 2 or 3 days, that unique address, the check cashing people, okay, they're able to, the bank you took it to, they're able to go contact my bank, have money leave my bank, or leave my account, and now go into your account. Does that make sense? Usually banks fake it up front. So they'll say, oh, your funds will be available next business day, something like that. But the funds might not actually arrive for 4 days. So banks are kind of covering you in the middle. So you have spendable cash. But Bitcoin, or theory coins in this case, don't work significantly different, except there's no names attached to it. Okay, so on my check, I'm writing Mike Littman on there. If we were dealing with with Claudio, we're writing Claudio on there. I see. They drew a picture of a check, but then they wrote. Yeah, it's kind of weird. If this was Bitcoin, we would not have a name written on here. All we'd have is this account number information down here. This is where the coins are coming from. We don't know that's from Claudio. We don't know anything. We also wouldn't see Jesper on there. We'd see another big list of numbers. That's where the coins are going. Okay? Oh, interesting enough, you can also not deny money. So if you have my my wallet address, my bank account number, my name will do you no good in the cryptocurrency world. But if you have my bank account number, if you will, my wallet address, and you send me coins, I don't know why I would send them back, reject them, but they're mine. I get them. They're automatically mine. And if I lose access to my wallet, they're gone. Nobody else has them because the last place the blockchain said they should be was in my wallet. And who has access to my wallet? Me. Or had. I had access to that wallet, lost the password, whatever. That's something else we'll talk about is how do you keep your coins? Do you keep them in a wallet on your computer? Do you keep them in a cloud wallet, aka trusting somebody else to keep track of it? It gets really interesting. But with Bitcoin or with Theory coins, there are no names, just unique addresses. Yep.
Okay, we can't deny, but we can take it back.
No, that's the other. So let's say I send you some coins, and then let's say you're supposed to send me an item, and you don't send it to me. So I send you coins, and you're supposed to, I don't know, ship me an Xbox, okay? And you decide you're not going to give me my Xbox. So I yell at you and say, oh, you got to give me my money back. I want my coins back. I am completely reliant on you deciding to send them back to me. Where if I go to Best Buy and I swipe a credit card, well, let's say I go to their website and I buy an Xbox online, and for whatever reason the Xbox never ships to my house. There's somebody you can complain to, right? I can call the credit card company. I can say, look, I just got scammed by Best Buy. And the credit card company is going to go on there and they're going to, they'll reverse the charge or whatever, do chargebacks. Or, you can complain to your bank. There's people you can go and yell at if you're scammed with US dollars. But in this case, you have my Theory coins, and you also, I don't even know if you have the Xbox or not. All I know is I didn't get it, right? So it's out of my hands. That would be probably the biggest problem with coins right now. And I'll kind of finish up by throwing one more comment out there, and something we're going to tackle this semester is the idea is that really a weakness of cryptocurrency? Is it really a weakness of this type of currency that did not exist with dollars in the beginning? See, it's easy for us to say, well, if we were doing something with US dollars, it would work this way. Not in the early days of the US dollar. If I handed you cash in the early days of the US dollar and you were going to, give me a horse or something, and you didn't give me the horse, I'm still reliant on you handing the cash back to me. And chances are you probably had a gun back then, right? So it's really no different. The difference today is with fiat currencies like the US dollar, we have infrastructure built up around it that protects us. Part of the reason why I said at the beginning of class, I think at some point you have to trust somebody. We're just starting to see that infrastructure being built up in the Bitcoin world. So it's kind of it's almost the Wild West of currencies. Okay? All right, so we'll stop there. We'll pick up where we left off here next time. At some point I'll have like a little video I want to go through, and then we'll kind of talk about that. But decent starting point. The syllabus is up on Angel, and I also record all the lectures. So I'll put a link up on Angel so you can go and rewatch them as much as you want. I'll see everybody on Wednesday.